everyone, and welcome to Fresh Outlook on this first week of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm Mia Toschi. Wherever you are in the world, we thank you for watching. We begin today in Iraq, where the situation is intense and heating up. There are so many questions, including, will Prime Minister al-Maliki step aside? Could this latest unrest create a new worldwide financial crisis? And most of all, how can this crisis be resolved? Let's have a look and talk it out.
There's going to be no quick fix to the crisis in Iraq. That's sent oil prices rising again. Brent crude almost touching $113 a barrel.
Iraq
is one of the world's most important oil exporters and producers. It is now number 2 with an OPEC behind Iran. Even a small reduction of Iraq's output will have a huge impact on the oil price.
But Iran is now touted as a possible solution to the crisis. There is even talk of communication between Iran and the U.S.
It's unknown territory to some extent because obviously diplomatic relations between those two countries are frosty at best.
But there's no immediate threat to Iraq's oil supplies, as most are hundreds of miles south of the fighting. Any attempts by the militants to venture in that direction is also expected to be met with far tougher resistance than in the north.
To discuss more, we are joined by my co-host and former White House aide, Dee Dee Benkie, psychologist Dr. Bart Rossi in studio, not in Florida. And joining us from our D.C. studio is Mark Irion. He is the CEO of Levick Energy, and we welcome you to the show today, Mark. Well, we want to talk about the fact that we're obviously seeing such disruption over in Iraq right now. They're talking about these oil fields being far south. Do you think that it's possible that Iran could be a solution and an ally to the U.S.? And we were talking about this earlier. Dee Dee, I'll let you take that one right now.
Yeah, I really think relying on Iran for anything is probably not a great idea. When it comes to the oil, we have a solution. It's not hard. We just go offshore. Louisiana, we drill in Alaska, and we have our own oil reserves. So Obama's really causing a double problem because he will not lift the restrictions for us to drill here and drill now.
And you mentioned Obama. Let's talk about his polls this week. Also, some pretty bad week in terms of numbers for President Obama.
In the tank. Not doing well at all.
Well, when it comes into the tank, I think of Ronald Reagan a year before he left office. It was 37%. So I think the president has to do what he has to do. I agree with Dee Dee halfway. I think relying on Iran is a bad idea. They're not going to be friendly. They're not going to do anything positive. They only are interested in themselves. I don't think that's going to work. But this whole conflict presents a conflict for all of us and around the world. Because how do we deal with terrorist groups? We know that the last administration getting involved in nation building was the wrong idea. So we have to come up with the best strategy right now.
All right. Well, we want to also talk about, obviously, what impact this is going to have on the oil industry. And Mark Irion of Levick Energy, obviously, this is your business. What long-term impact could the violence in Iraq have on the global energy market?
Well, thank you. 3 things, really. I think, first of all, although Iraq produces only about 4% of global supply, it's important to recognize that the global oil market is like a gigantic waterbed of oil. And no one here probably owns one, but we've all laid on them. We know if you jump on one corner of that bed, it sends shock waves throughout the entire bed. And a king-size waterbed has over a ton of water in it. The weight equivalent of Iraq's supply, it would be like dropping 5 16-pound bowling balls on that bed. So you get the picture. That'll send shock waves throughout the entire system if it were to go offline. Thankfully, so far, that hasn't happened. Second thing, really, the United States has done a lot in the decade since the Iraq War to actually lower our exposure. But we have increased production from 8 million barrels a day back in 2003 to over 12, a 50% increase, more than Iraq produces today. At that same time, global demand's grown by over 11 million barrels a day. So even though we have done a lot to lower our exposure, Iraq still counts a lot. And
Well,
of
Mark,
course,
let me
third point is,
let me ask you another.
much of the future global supply is expected to come from Iraq. Yes.
Well, just wanted to ask you another question.
I'm sorry, go
just
ahead.
To jump in here, we were talking about possible solutions. Do you think Iran could be a possible solution and ally? Or to Dee Dee's point, do you think there should be more offshore drilling here in the U.S.?
Well, I think those are two separate questions. One, you know, the solution inside Iraq has to be to bring all the factions together. I don't think that's Iran's interest. That's got to be an Iraq-driven interest, and that's President Obama's point. They have to build a coalition, share the oil wealth. Is part of the solution more production everywhere else? Absolutely. And the United States, as I said, has really done its part over the last decade, increasing our supply over 50%, but we can do more, and so can other countries.
Well, hang on there. We want to talk about Ukraine and Russia shortly, but we want to go back to Iraq with our in-studio guest for a few minutes. And let's talk about the violence there. They're sending 300 people. The White House is deploying 300 folks to go over there. What good can they possibly do right now? I mean, these are 300 people. Yeah,
actually, they can do something. What they're actually going to do is they're going to target the insurgents. They're going to help the Iraqis try to attack these people. It's going to be something that where they're working with our equipment that's left there, and they're going to be involved in the attacks to try to stabilize the country. So 300 people can do a lot in terms of leadership. Beyond that, I don't know what else we could do.
Dee Dee, your thoughts? I mean, 300 people?
Yeah, 300 people. I don't know. It sort of sounds like a party in the backyard. It just does not seem like it's enough to make an impact. And I would trust Senator McCain on this. He thinks we definitely need to have more sanctions and give them more aid. I just don't 300 is enough. But, President Obama has always been, he always backs off of anything militarily. Even when he says there's a red line, still nothing happens. So I don't expect anything to happen with him.
Well, it's getting pretty frightening just within the last 24 hours. 2 more cities, the border near Syria. And let's not forget, we're talking about oil prices and gas prices here in the U.S., but let's take a look at the humane factor here. The refugee crisis also, the women and children who are being killed. But there are so many refugees now as a result of this crisis.
Well, to me, it's stunning, the difference in the reaction, because, Senator McCain is so upset and he's so emotional and angry, because he gets it. He was a soldier. I mean, he was a war hero. Where Obama's like, hey, no drama, Obama, just hanging out. I don't really care about the war. I want to go on talk shows and just be cool. I mean, it's really getting to be a joke.
I don't see it that way at all. I see it that this is a conflict and it's a tough one to handle. We already lost.
But handled
we already lost by going into Iraq in the first place. It was a disaster.
It was stabilized, and then Obama just let it go.
It was never stabilized.
Yes, it was. Of course it was.
With the Shiites and the Sunnis and the Kurds, it will never be
Well, you didn't have this, now it's escalated to
was
disaster.
I have to chime in here also. This wasn't a Bush problem. This has been a decades problem. So this is they tried to stabilize things, but right now it is absolute anarchy over there.
Right, and I think that what we need to do is to protect our interests. I think you're right about talking about oil and protecting the whole world in terms of oil supply. That's a legitimate concern. I agree with Dee Dee on that. But to send troops and to do more, we can't do the impossible. We cannot do the impossible. We can't fight all the wars. Nigeria's got another terrorist group. This outfit's out there now. We can't fight everybody.
Hey, look, but you got to stabilize it to some degree. We're going to have World War III. I mean, it's getting very serious over there, very, very serious. And we have done a good job in the past years having at least some stabilization. Now it's gone total craziness.
Well,
it's very dangerous.
Let's talk a little politics more. What about the Prime Minister? Obviously, the White House is hinting that they would like to see al-Maliki gone. Your thoughts, your predictions, Dee Dee?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to say, sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's just a toss-up. Who knows?
I don't think he's, using an old term here, a winning personality, because he doesn't want to include everybody. He doesn't want to include the Sunnis. He only wants to be a Shiite leader. And this is not what the country needed. Actually, it might break apart and be 3 factions.
And do you really think he cares what we want? I mean, that's the thing. It may even make it almost worse. Like, okay, if the United States wants that, then guess what? I'm staying no matter what.
And we also want to weigh in with Mark. And Mark, are you listening to all this? We're looking for predictions from you. What do you think about the Prime Minister? Obviously, the White House is hinting that they would like to see him gone.
I actually think that that is part of the message the president's sending by putting in initially at least 300 advisors. The United States does not want to fight a pro-Shia war. One of the things the president is doing is validating whether or not the Iraqi army is going to be made up of all the interests. And before we commit any further assets, possibly air power, I think the president of the United States wants to know that this is not just a Shia counteroffensive that we're going to lead.
Well, what do you think the U.S. role should be?
The United States and in the entire global free nations all have a vested interest in the outcome of this, for sure. But it is not the United States to fix because, as your other guest said, we cannot. It must be a solution that is led by some leader, not Maliki, who is strong enough and of a disposition to actually bring together the factions into a coalition government. That's not this current prime minister. And I think more than that, the United States cannot do. We cannot fix it militarily alone. We have to continue to put pressure for a leader that's going to bring the Iraqi people together, if that's possible.
And Mark, since you're in the energy business, we want to talk about another part of the world. And how will Russia's cutting off of the gas affect Ukraine and the rest of Europe?
Well, this is a tremendous burden for Ukraine and all of Europe. Ukraine gets about 2/3 of its gas from Russia. Europe gets close to 1/3. A lot of that actually travels through about half through a pipeline that runs through Ukraine. So Europe is desperate to build other supplies of gas, and I think the connection here for the United States is we have got to speed up our permitting of LNG export facilities. We just recently approved the second, but that LNG export is not yet flowing. And the United States has a tremendous capacity to alleviate the situation in Europe. But those are very long lead times. We really have to stop the conversation about sort of a scarcity mentality that if we don't keep all of our own gas supplies for our own domestic use, somehow we're going to be at a loss. The world
and Mark,
needs American gas.
We're running out of time, but I do want to ask one last question. It's the first day of summer. Your predictions for gas prices here in the U.S.?
Well, I'm not an economist, but we can see that even the threat of Iraqi shutdown has had its effect both at the barrel price, which will be reflected shortly in pump prices. Where that goes, I don't know, except that it looks like it's going up.
Well, Mark Irion of Levick Energy, we certainly thank you for all of your insights. Don't go away, everyone. America's most famous doctor is scolded on Capitol Hill. We'll have more on that when we come back.